FRC is now bust. Was the problem rates being so high? Boy. I mean, you got a perfect storm here. I think it's easiest if you break it down to the liability side of their balance sheet and the asset side of their balance sheet. On the asset side, I mean, they had probably a lot. I mean, I didn't study them like I studied Stupid Valley Bank, but I'm assuming they're in the same category. Stupid Valley Bank had a lot of fixed rate assets on their balance sheet, like treasuries, mortgage-backed securities. But they had very hot money on the liability side. And they had all tech companies that were burning cash. So how they didn't come to the conclusion that the people would take their deposits out, either because they're losing money or because there's just better opportunities in money market funds or T-bills. I just don't know how they could be that oblivious. They didn't manage their interest rate risk. I don't know how they could have done that. Also, they had a lot of commercial real estate as far as loans as assets. That's probably not too good. Who knows if some of those things blew up, but it's just kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you have First Republic, they get that cash infusion of deposits from those other big banks at 30 billion. But you know, that just prolonged the inevitable, right? Like, you got to put yourself in the position of a depositor at First Republic. Are you going to keep your money there? I mean, come on. And nobody is. So I don't care if the Fed bails them out, or you're going to take your money out, especially if you got a lot of money. And they probably had a lot of it of depositors that were over the FDIC limit. And, you know, they've got to sell all of those assets on their balance sheet because all those people are taking the deposits out. They got to sell those assets at a loss that just eats away at their equity or their capital. And then, you know, they're insolvent very, very quickly. So I think maybe another question to ask is, why did they not just go to repo? Right? Let's say that they had a bunch of treasuries on their balance sheet. And you say, George, well, if they went to repo, they'd be able to borrow, but they'd be able to borrow at like 70 cents on the dollar because they had to take a haircut on it. Well, fine, but they don't have 100% of their deposits leaving the bank, you see. So let's just say 100% of the assets out of the balance sheet were treasuries that were yielding 2%. And the asset side of their balance sheet, let's just say they had, 100 billion, something like that. And let's just say 50 billion wants to leave. So they've got to sell the, let's say half their assets, and they got to sell those at a 70% haircut. Well, okay, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're completely bust, because, you know, the math can work there. I'm not giving you exact numbers, obviously, but you see what I'm saying. That if they're not, they could have like 25% of the people want to leave. And even though they have to take a 70% haircut on the asset side of the balance sheet, they can still manage that, right? Especially assuming that it doesn't happen all at once. So that's, I think, an interesting question, is why didn't they choose that option? And I think the answer is because nobody wanted that counterparty risk. You know, they talk about liquidity. I don't want to get off on a tangent, but they talk about liquidity. The Fed provides liquidity, but only to a certain degree. I mean, the banks have to provide that liquidity at the end of the day. And, are they balance sheet constrained? No, but they're constrained by counterparty risk. So I think just no one wanted to touch them with a 10-foot pole. So, you know, what was their problem? Pick them, right? I mean, they had a problem of the asset side of their balance sheet, and they had a problem with the liability side, and they had an overarching problem that the global monetary system is broken, and that there's increased counterparty risk within the system. So nobody wants to extend that credit to the Stupid Valley banks or to the First Republic banks because of the counterparty risk, not necessarily because there's all this balance sheet capacity constraints.